Viewer discretion is advised. This presentation discusses events involving prophecies of violence, death, and widespread suffering, which may be disturbing to some audiences. There is a secret, locked away in the Vatican archives, that is said to contain a message from heaven itself. A message so terrifying that for decades popes refused to reveal it to the world. It speaks of a bishop in white, walking through a ruined city, over the bodies of the dead, before being executed by a group of soldiers. For years, the world wondered what this apocalyptic vision could mean. And then on May 13, 1981, it seemed to come true. In the middle of St. Peter's Square, Pope John Paul II was greeting a crowd of thousands when 4 gunshots cracked through the air. A professional assassin just feet away had hit him. One bullet tore through his abdomen, narrowly missing his main artery. Another lodged near his spine. By all medical accounts, he should have died. But as he was rushed to the hospital, bleeding out, he kept repeating one name: Fatima. He was shot on May 13th, the exact anniversary of the first vision at Fatima. When he recovered, he was certain the prophecy had been about him, and the Virgin Mary herself had intervened, deflecting the bullet to save his life. The Vatican finally released the text of this third secret in the year 2000, confirming the Pope's belief. Case closed. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the vision released to the public was only a part of the real prophecy? High-ranking cardinals, Vatican insiders, and even the Pope's personal exorcist have claimed that the most disturbing part of the message is still being hidden. A part that doesn't speak of the past but of our future. A warning so dire, the Vatican fears it would cause a global panic. So what really happened in Fatima? And what is the one secret they are still so desperate to keep? To find the answer, we have to go back to a world on fire. The year is 1917. The Great War, what we now call World War I, is tearing Europe apart. Millions are dying in the trenches of France and Belgium. In Russia, a violent revolution is overthrowing a centuries-old dynasty, planting the seeds of an atheist empire that will cast a shadow over the entire 20th century. And in the small rural nation of Portugal, a deeply religious and impoverished people pray for an end to the chaos. The new Portuguese government is aggressively anti-religious, seizing church property and jailing priests. For the faithful, it feels like the end of days. And it is here, in a forgotten corner of the country called Fatima, in a rocky pasture known as the Cova da Iria, that our story begins. It doesn't begin with popes or presidents. It begins with 3 children: 10-year-old Lúcia dos Santos and her 2 younger cousins, 7-year-old Jacinta and 9-year-old Francisco Marto. They were simple, uneducated shepherd children. Their world was small, defined by the seasons, their flock of sheep, and the daily recitation of the rosary. They couldn't read or write. They knew almost nothing of the Great War or the revolutions shaking the globe. They were the last people you would expect to be chosen as messengers for a secret that would alter the course of history. But before they saw the lady, they saw something else. In the spring of 1916, a full year before the main events, the children were tending their sheep when a strange, transparent figure began to appear to them. He identified himself as the Angel of Peace, the guardian angel of Portugal. He taught them prayers of reparation, urging them to offer up their sufferings for the conversion of sinners and for peace in their country. He knelt with them, his forehead touching the ground, and had them repeat the prayers after him. In his final appearance, he held a chalice, with a communion host suspended above it, dripping blood. He gave them communion, telling them to make amends for the crimes and outrages committed against God. The children were terrified, but they did as the angel instructed. This was their training, a preparation for something far greater and far more terrifying that was about to come. Then came the day, May 13, 1917. It was a beautiful, clear Sunday. After attending Mass, the children led their sheep to the Cova da Iria. Around noon, as they were playing, the sky was suddenly ripped by a brilliant flash of light. They thought it was lightning, a freak summer storm. They began to gather their flock to head for shelter. Then another flash, even brighter than the first. They looked up, and standing atop a small holm oak tree was a figure. A lady, they would later say, who was brighter than the sun. She was dressed in a robe of pure white, edged with gold, and held a rosary of white pearls. Her face was beautiful, but filled with a profound sadness. Lúcia, being the oldest, found the courage to speak. "Where are you from?" she asked. The lady replied with a voice that was soft and serene, "I am from heaven." She told the children not to be afraid. She had a message. She asked them to return to that same spot, on the 13th day of each month, for the next 6 months. At the final meeting in October, she would tell them who she was and what she wanted. And then she made a promise that would seal their fate. She promised she would show them a miracle so that all would believe. She also asked them a question that would define the rest of their short lives. Are you willing to offer yourselves to God and bear all the sufferings He wills to send you, as an act of reparation for the sins by which He is offended, and of supplication for the conversion of sinners? The children, without hesitation, agreed. They had no idea what they were signing up for. They had no idea that their simple yes would plunge them into a storm of disbelief, ridicule, and interrogation. Before she left, she gave them their first glimpse of the prophecy. She told them that the war would soon end. But she warned that if people did not stop offending God, a worse one would break out during the reign of Pope Pius XI. She gave them a sign to watch for: a night illuminated by an unknown, eerie light. This, she said, would be the great sign from God that He was about to punish the world for its crimes, by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church. This was just a fragment, a piece of the puzzle. The most shocking parts of the message, the vision of hell, the call for the consecration of Russia, and the secret of the bishop in white, were yet to come. As the lady ascended back into the sky, she left the 3 children standing alone in the field, forever changed. They had been entrusted with a message of cosmic importance, a message from heaven about war, peace, and the fate of the entire world. They were told to keep it a secret, but a secret of this magnitude, given to 3 small children, was a burden too heavy to carry alone. And it was a secret that would not stay quiet for long. The story began to leak, first to their families, then to their village. And the reaction was not belief. It was scorn, suspicion, and anger. The children were about to face their first great trial, not from a divine vision, but from the very people they lived with, who were convinced they were either lying or had been tricked by the devil. Their ordeal had only just begun. For Lúcia, that ordeal began the moment she walked through the door of her own home. Her mother, Maria Rosa, was a practical, hard-working woman whose faith was built on prayer and obedience, not on fantastical tales from a 10-year-old. When Lúcia, bursting with a secret too glorious to contain, tried to explain the beautiful lady from heaven, her mother's face hardened. This wasn't joy, it was blasphemy. It was a lie. Maria Rosa saw only 2 possibilities. Either her daughter was telling a calculated, wicked fib to get attention, or worse, she was being deceived by a demon disguised as an angel. The questions turned into accusations. The accusations turned into threats. She was called a liar, a fake, a disgrace to the family. Maria Rosa, in her terror and shame, tried to force a confession. She used ridicule, then anger, then even a broom handle, trying to beat the story out of her daughter. But Lúcia wouldn't budge. How could she? To her, the lady was more real than the sting of the blows. She had seen heaven. What was a worldly punishment compared to that? Francisco and Jacinta faced a different, but equally confusing reaction. Their parents were softer, more inclined to believe the simple honesty of their children. But even their gentle faith was shaken by the village's reaction. Whispers followed the children through the dusty streets of Aljustrel. They became a spectacle. Some neighbors mocked them, calling them little sorcerers. Others looked on with a fearful curiosity. The children, who had once been an invisible part of the rural landscape, were now the center of a growing storm. And then the institution arrived. The parish priest, Father Manuel Ferreira, summoned them. This was not a gentle pastoral inquiry. This was an interrogation. Imagine it. 3 small, uneducated shepherd children, standing on the cold stone floor of the presbytery, facing a man who held the keys to their salvation. He was their spiritual authority, the representative of God on earth. And he did not believe them. He questioned them separately, a classic tactic to find inconsistencies in their story. He was sharp, logical, and deeply skeptical. He picked at the details. What color were the lady's eyes? What was the hem of her mantle made of? Did she have shoes? He tried to trip them up, to twist their words, to expose the lie he was certain was there. Francisco, shy and quiet, could only say that he saw the lady but could not hear her words. Jacinta, small and emotional, repeated what she saw through tears of frustration. But Lúcia, Lúcia was the rock. She met his every question with a calm, unshakable certainty. She recounted the vision with a clarity that unsettled the priest. There was no pride in her voice, no hint of fabrication. She spoke of the light, the rosary, the lady's request for prayer, as if she were describing the weather. It was simply what happened. Father Ferreira was stumped. They were either the most convincing liars he had ever met, or they were telling a truth so profound it was beyond his comprehension. He dismissed them with a stern warning. This story could be from the devil. He forbid them from returning to the Cova de Iria, and ordered them to put an end to the whole affair. For the children, this was a devastating blow. Their own priest, the man of God, thought they were consorting with evil. The pressure was immense. Lúcia's mother redoubled her efforts, begging her to recant, to confess it was all a game, a dream, anything to stop the shame that was falling on their family. For a moment, Lúcia wavered. The weight of the world was on her shoulders. Perhaps it would be easier to just say it was a lie. She told her cousins they wouldn't go back on the 13th of the next month, June. But little Jacinta, her heart breaking, began to cry. She couldn't bear to disappoint the beautiful lady. Her simple, trusting faith shamed Lúcia's moment of doubt. The promise had been made. They had to go back. And so Lúcia's resolve hardened once more. They would obey the lady, no matter the cost. June 13th arrived, the feast day of St. Anthony. The village was buzzing, not with festivities, but with gossip about the three little shepherds. Would they dare defy the priest? Would they show up at the cova? Despite Father Ferreira's warnings, a small crowd of about 50 people decided to see for themselves. They weren't all believers. Most were just curious, drawn by the scent of scandal, hoping to witness the children being exposed as frauds. As noon approached, Lúcia, Francisco, and Jacinta knelt by the home oak tree and began to pray the rosary. The crowd watched, some mocking, some praying along nervously. The air was thick with anticipation. And then it happened again. Lúcia called out, "Look, there's the lightning. She's coming." To the crowd, nothing had changed. The sun was still bright, the sky was still clear. But the three children were transfixed, their faces turned upward, their eyes locked on something no one else could see. Lúcia began a conversation with the invisible presence. The crowd leaned in, straining to hear her side of the dialogue. She asked the lady what she wanted, and the lady answered, for the children alone to hear. She repeated her request for them to pray the rosary every day. But then she revealed something new, something deeper. She told Lúcia she wanted her to learn to read and write. And she revealed a glimpse of their destinies. She promised to take Jacinta and Francisco to heaven soon. But Lúcia was to stay on earth for some time longer. Her mission was to spread devotion to the lady's immaculate heart. A heart, she said, that would be Lúcia's refuge and the way that would lead her to God. Imagine being 10 years old and being told that your beloved cousins, your only companions in this incredible secret, were going to die, and that you were being left behind for a long, difficult mission. It was a prophecy wrapped in a death sentence, a divine calling that was also a profound personal tragedy. While the children were lost in this heartbreaking celestial conversation, the crowd began to notice something. They couldn't see the lady, but some later swore the brilliant light of the midday sun had dimmed, as if a cloud had passed over it, though the sky was cloudless. Others claimed to see the topmost branches of the little home oak tree bend down, as if under an invisible weight, and then spring back up as the vision ended. It was subtle. It was inconclusive. It was just enough to fuel the fire. When the vision faded, the crowd swarmed the children. What did she say? What did you see? Lúcia, her mind reeling from the news about her cousins, shared what she could. The request for prayer, the devotion to the Immaculate Heart. But she kept the prophecy of death a secret, a heavy stone she now had to carry alone. The second visit had changed everything. It was no longer just a strange story. There were now dozens of witnesses. And while they hadn't seen a lady from heaven, they had seen something. They couldn't explain it. The skeptics remained skeptical, but the seeds of belief had been planted in fertile ground. The news spread beyond their tiny village to neighboring towns. The story was growing, taking on a life of its own. For Lúcia, Francisco, and Jacinta, the path was now terrifyingly clear. They had a mission from heaven, but with that mission came a terrible new burden. For Lúcia, it was the secret knowledge of her cousins' early deaths. For all three, it was the growing realization that their lives were no longer their own. And the lady had promised to return again on July 13th. This time, she said, she would reveal a secret meant for the entire world. A secret so terrifying it would require a miracle to prove it was true. The word secret hung in the air of Fatima, a spark in the dry tinder of a world at war. For 1 month between June 13th and July 13th, that spark grew into a wildfire of rumor, speculation, and fervent hope. For Lúcia, Francisco, and Jacinta, that month was an eternity. Their small, quiet lives were over. The Cova de Iria, once their private pasture, was now a pilgrimage site. Strangers appeared at their homes at all hours, kneeling before them, begging for blessings, demanding answers, pressing holy cards and rosaries into their small hands. They were no longer children. They were conduits, objects of a consuming public obsession. The pressure was immense, and it came from all sides. Their own parents, torn between faith and fear, oscillated between protecting them and pushing them for more information. Neighbors who had known them since birth now looked at them with a mixture of awe and suspicion. But the most formidable interrogator was their own parish priest, Father Manuel Ferreira. He was a good man but a cautious one. He saw the potential for mass hysteria, for scandal, for the church to be made a fool of. He summoned the children repeatedly, separating them, questioning them with the sharp, logical mind of a trained theologian. He cross-examined them, looking for any crack, any inconsistency in their story. He played one's testimony against the others, but the children never wavered. Their story remained as solid and unchanging as the granite hills around them. They described the lady with the same simple, profound details. They recounted her words without embellishment. Their steadfastness was baffling. It was either the greatest lie ever conceived by children, or it was the unshakable truth. As July 13th approached, the tension in the dusty streets of Fatima was thick enough to taste. The secular press in Lisbon had caught wind of the story and began publishing mocking articles about the religious hysterics in the countryside. The local administrator, a staunchly anti-clerical man named Artur de Oliveira Santos, was watching the growing movement with increasing alarm. To him, this wasn't a miracle. It was a public order problem, a monarchist plot, a direct challenge to the fragile new Portuguese republic. The forces of disbelief were beginning to circle. But for every skeptic, a dozen believers emerged. On the morning of July 13, 1917, the roads to the Cova de Iria were choked with people. They came on foot, on donkeys and carts. They were farmers, laborers, and merchants. Some were devout, clutching rosaries and praying with desperate intensity. Others were merely curious, drawn by the irresistible promise of a spectacle. A few were openly hostile, there to jeer and debunk the whole affair. By noon, a crowd of over 4,000 people had gathered under the baking summer sun, trampling the grass around the small home oak tree. Lúcia arrived with her cousins, her heart pounding in her chest. The sheer size of the crowd was terrifying. They pressed in on them, a wall of bodies and expectant faces. Lúcia's mother, still deeply conflicted, was there, weeping with anxiety. As the clock struck noon, Lúcia looked up at the sky and saw the familiar flash of light. She cried out, "Be quiet! The lady is coming!" A sudden hush fell over the massive crowd. The buzzing of insects seemed to amplify in the silence. The sun on their skin seemed to lose some of its heat. For the children, the world melted away, and there she was, standing over the home oak, more brilliant than ever before. Lúcia, emboldened by the lady's presence, spoke, "What do you want of me?" The lady's reply was the same as before. "I want you to come here on the 13th of next month. Continue to say the rosary every day in honor of Our Lady of the Rosary, to obtain the peace of the world and the end of the war, for she alone can help you." Lúcia, burdened by the hopes of the thousands watching, began to present their petitions. "I should like to ask you to tell us who you are, and to work a miracle so that everyone will believe that you are appearing to us." The lady's response was a promise and a pivot. "Continue to come here every month. In October, I will tell you who I am and what I want, and I will perform a miracle for all to see and believe." And then her expression shifted. The gentle benevolence was replaced by a look of profound sadness and gravity. It was time for the secret. The lady spoke, and her words were meant for the children alone, a secret to be held in their hearts, a burden almost too great to bear. "Sacrifice yourselves for sinners," she said, and say many times, especially when you make some sacrifice, "O Jesus, it is for love of you, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the sins committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary." As she spoke these last words, the lady opened her hands. The light that streamed from them didn't shoot upwards toward the heavens as it had before. This time it shot downwards. It pierced the very earth beneath their feet. The ground simply vanished, and the three children found themselves staring into a terrifying, all-consuming abyss. It was the vision of hell. Lúcia would later describe it with chilling clarity. It was a vast sea of fire. Plunged in that fire were demons and human souls in the form of transparent, burning embers. They were black or the color of polished bronze, floating in the conflagration. They were lifted into the air by the flames that shot out from within themselves, along with great clouds of smoke, only to fall back on every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium. They fell amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified the children and made them tremble with fear. The demons were distinguishable by their terrifying and repulsive likeness to frightful and unknown animals, all black and transparent. The children looked up, their faces pale with terror, their eyes wide with what they had just seen. Jacinta let out a small cry of pure horror. The lady looked at them, her face filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. "You have seen hell," she said softly, "where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart." This was the first part of the secret, a raw, unfiltered vision of damnation, shown not to theologians or saints, but to three peasant children in a field. It was a vision designed to burn itself into their minds, to fuel the urgency of her message. And then came the second part, a prophecy that would echo through the rest of the 20th century. "The war," she said, referring to the Great War that was still raging across Europe, "is going to end. But if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pius XI. At that moment in 1917, the Pope was Benedict XV. Pius XI wouldn't be elected for another 5 years. "When you see a night illumined by an unknown light," she continued, "know that this is the great sign given you by God that He is about to punish the world for its crimes, by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and of the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart, and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted, and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated." Think about that. In 1917, Russia was in the midst of its first revolution, but the Bolshevik takeover was still months away. The idea that this backward agrarian empire would become a global force spreading errors across the world was unthinkable. The prophecy of a second, worse war, the annihilation of nations, the specific mention of a future pope, it was a stunning, terrifying roadmap of the future. But she didn't end with despair. "In the end," the lady promised, "my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world." Then she told them of a third part of the secret, one they were not to reveal to anyone. She concluded, "Do not tell this to anyone. Francisco, yes, you may tell him." This final unrevealed piece of the puzzle would become the most famous and controversial prophecy of all time. When the vision ended, the children were left shaking, staring at the empty space above the tree. The crowd surged forward, shouting questions. "What did she say? What did you see?" But they saw the look on the children's faces. The playful innocence was gone, replaced by a solemn, haunted gravity. They had seen something that had changed them forever. The public couldn't know the specifics, not yet. All they knew was that something profound had happened. And now the authorities, who had dismissed this as a childish fantasy, were beginning to realize they were facing something they could not control. Their mockery was turning to anger, and their next move would not be to question the children, but to silence them, by any means necessary. The man who would orchestrate this silencing was Artur de Oliveira Santos, the administrator of the local municipality, a man known derisively by some as the tinsmith for his father's trade. But Santos was no simple artisan. He was an ambitious, zealous politician, a fierce anti-clerical, and a high-ranking Freemason in a new republic that was actively trying to crush the power of the Catholic Church. To him, the events at Fatima were not a divine mystery. They were a political problem, a dangerous reactionary charade orchestrated by priests to stir up the illiterate peasantry and undermine the secular state. The children weren't visionaries, they were pawns. And the growing crowds were a powder keg he intended to defuse. August 13th was the date of the next promised apparition. For the believers, it was a day of anticipation. For Artur Santos, it was a deadline. His plan was simple and brutal. He would cut the head off the snake. He would take the children. He arrived in the village of Aljustrel that morning in his carriage, a symbol of authority and power in the rustic hamlet. He didn't come with soldiers, he came with a smile. He approached the Marto and Santos households not with threats, but with a cunning offer. He told the parents he was a believer. He said he, too, wanted to see the lady from heaven, and that he simply had to speak with the children first. He suggested they all ride with him to the Cova de Iria, and on the way they could stop by the rectory to see the parish priest. It was a masterful piece of deception. Lucia's father, a man who still harbored deep doubts about his daughter's stories, saw a way out. If the administrator and the priest could sort this out, perhaps his family's strange notoriety would finally end. He agreed. The Marto parents, simpler and more trusting, also consented. So Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, dressed in their Sunday best, climbed into the administrator's carriage. But the carriage didn't turn towards the priest's house. It didn't turn towards the Cova de Iria. It galloped past the turnoff, kicking up dust on the road that led not to the apparition site, but miles away to the town of Vila Nova de Aurum, the seat of Artur Santos's power. The children looked at each other, a knot of fear tightening in their stomachs. They were not being taken to see a priest. They were being kidnapped. Back at the Cova de Iria, the crowd was enormous. By noon, nearly 20,000 people had gathered under the blistering August sun. They came from all over Portugal, a sea of peasants, merchants, and even a few curious aristocrats. They prayed the rosary, their voices a low hum of anticipation. But as the minutes ticked past noon, the children were nowhere to be seen. A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd. Had they been forbidden to come? Had they finally admitted it was all a lie? Then something happened. A sudden clap of thunder echoed from a clear, cloudless sky, silencing the crowd. A brilliant flash of light, like lightning, shot across the heavens. And then the air itself seemed to change. The sun dimmed, the temperature dropped, and the atmosphere took on a strange yellowish hue. People looked up and saw a small, luminous cloud descend and hover for a few moments over the home oak tree where the lady always appeared, before rising and vanishing. Many reported seeing strange rainbow-like colors playing on the clouds, on the trees, and on their own clothes. The phenomenon lasted for about 10 minutes. The lady had kept her appointment, even if her messengers had been stolen away. Miles away, in a cold government building in Aurum, those messengers were facing their greatest trial. Artur Santos brought them into his office. He began with kindness, offering them sweets and coins. He asked them, gently at first, to just tell him the secret the lady had revealed. They refused. He separated them, placing them in different rooms, a classic interrogation tactic designed to make them feel isolated and afraid. He started with Jacinta, the youngest, believing she would be the easiest to break. He pleaded, he cajoled, he promised her anything she wanted. She just shook her head, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I cannot." He moved on to Francisco, who showed the same quiet, unshakable resolve. Finally, he came to Lucia, the leader. He changed his tactics. The kindness vanished, replaced by cold, hard threats. He told her the others had already confessed, that she was the only one holding out. It was a lie. She didn't believe him. He threatened to have them all thrown into prison. They replied they would gladly suffer for the lady and for the conversion of sinners. Frustrated and enraged by their defiance, Santos had the children thrown into the town jail. They were put in a common cell, surrounded by hardened criminals. The inmates at first were amused by the sight of these 3 small children. But when little Jacinta began to cry, not from fear of the criminals, but from the pain of being separated from her mother, something shifted. Francisco and Lucia comforted her, reminding her of the lady's request to offer their sufferings for sinners. And then they did something extraordinary. They knelt down on the dirty floor of the jail cell and began to pray the rosary. The other prisoners fell silent. One by one they took off their hats. One inmate, seeing the children had no rosary beads, fashioned a makeshift one from a piece of rope. And there, in the grim darkness of the Aurum jail, the prisoners joined the children in prayer. The next morning, Artur Santos was even more determined to break them. He brought them back to his office for another round of interrogation. This time there would be no pretense of kindness. He told them that if they did not reveal the secret, a cauldron of boiling oil was being prepared in the next room, and they would be thrown into it one by one. This was not an idle threat to them. It was a terrifyingly real possibility in a country where anti-clerical violence was common. He pointed to Jacinta. "You first," he commanded. A guard took the little girl by the arm and led her out of the room. Lúcia and Francisco were left alone, listening. They could hear the guard's heavy footsteps, the opening and closing of a door. They waited, their hearts pounding, expecting to hear a scream, but there was only silence. A few minutes later, the administrator returned, his face a grim mask. "She's been boiled to death," he said flatly. "Now it's your turn, Francisco. Tell me the secret, or you'll suffer the same fate." Francisco looked him straight in the eye. "I cannot tell the secret," he said. "I would rather die." He too was led away. Now Lúcia was alone, believing both of her cousins were dead. The administrator loomed over her. "The secret," he demanded one last time. "Or the oil is for you." Through her tears, Lúcia gave the same answer. "I cannot." But it was all a bluff. A monstrous psychological torment inflicted on 3 children. Jacinta had not been boiled in oil. She had been taken to another room and threatened again. And again she had refused. So had Francisco. Santos brought them all back together, defeated. He had used every weapon in his arsenal: bribery, lies, isolation, and the most terrifying death threat imaginable. And he had failed. These were not ordinary children. Their conviction was absolute, their courage superhuman. News of the children's imprisonment had spread like wildfire. Public outrage was growing. The local authorities were being condemned, not just by believers, but by secular newspapers who saw the kidnapping and imprisonment of children as a gross abuse of power. Artur Santos had overplayed his hand. He hadn't silenced a conspiracy. He had created 3 small martyrs and turned a local curiosity into a national sensation. On August 15th, after 2 nights in jail, he had no choice but to release them. He drove them home himself and delivered them, unharmed but forever changed, to the steps of the rectory in Fátima. A few days later, on August 19th, the children were tending their sheep in a field near Aljustrel called Valinhos. They hadn't expected anything to happen. It wasn't the 13th of the month, and it wasn't the Cova da Iria. Suddenly, they felt that now familiar change in the atmosphere. The sun dimmed and they saw the flash of light. The lady was appearing to them again, over a small oak tree. She looked at them with a sad expression. She told them she had wanted to perform the great miracle in October, but the administrator's actions had prevented it. The miracle would still happen, she promised, but it would be less grand. She urged them again with even greater intensity to pray the rosary every day and to make sacrifices for sinners, saying, "Many souls go to hell because there are none to sacrifice themselves and to pray for them." The message was becoming darker, more urgent. The stakes, it seemed, were not just about a war on earth, but a war for the very souls of humanity. And as the children relayed this new message, the number of believers swelled, their faith now hardened by the state's persecution. The authorities had tried to extinguish the fire at Fátima. Instead, they had poured gasoline on it. And now, all of Portugal was turning its eyes toward the Cova da Iria, waiting for one date above all others: October 13th. The mayor's threats had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Instead of a cautionary tale, the story of the children's kidnapping became a martyr's legend. Instead of fear, it ignited a defiant faith across the country. The government, with its enlightened secular ideals, had intended to crush a rural superstition. Instead, they had made Fátima a national obsession. Now, the promise of a great miracle on October 13th was no longer a village rumor. It was a headline, a challenge, a date with destiny that all of Portugal, believers and skeptics alike, had circled on their calendar. The pressure on the 3 children became immense, a weight that would have crushed most adults. Every day, their small homes were besieged by a constant stream of visitors. There were the desperate, the sick, the grieving, all begging for intercession, for a message to be passed to the beautiful lady. They would press holy cards and rosaries into the children's hands, pleading for them to be blessed by the vision. Then there were the curious, the journalists, the theologians, and the cynics, all armed with questions designed to trap them, to expose the inconsistencies in their story. Lúcia, as the eldest and most articulate, bore the brunt of these interrogations. Her own mother, still convinced this was all a demonic deception or a catastrophic lie, continued to berate her, sometimes with threats, sometimes with tears, begging her to confess and end the family's shame. Lúcia would later write that this period was a true martyrdom, a trial by 1,000 cuts that tested her resolve more than any administrator's jail cell. As September approached, the anticipation was a palpable force. On the 13th of the month, a crowd estimated at nearly 30,000 people converged on the Cova de Iria. They came on foot, by donkey cart, in rickety automobiles. They choked the narrow, dusty roads for miles around the small hamlet of Aljustrel. This was no longer just a local affair. This was a national pilgrimage. The crowd was a cross-section of Portuguese society, poor farmers with weathered faces praying their rosaries, pious ladies from the cities, dressed in their finest black, and a growing number of skeptics, university students, and journalists, there to witness the great delusion firsthand. As noon approached, the children made their way through the throng of people to the home oak. The crowd pressed in, a sea of faces filled with hope and expectation. Right on schedule, as Lúcia began to pray, she called out, "She is coming." Those close enough saw her face transfigured. And while the crowd could not see the lady, thousands of witnesses reported seeing something extraordinary. A luminous globe of light, brilliant and clear, was seen moving slowly and majestically from the east towards the west, gliding through the sky until it came to rest over the home oak where the children knelt. The sun's light dimmed, the atmosphere turned a strange golden yellow, and a hush fell over the 30,000 souls. Then something else happened. From the clear blue sky, what looked like white flower petals or iridescent snowflakes began to fall over the crowd. They were beautiful, shimmering in the golden light, but as people reached out to catch them, they dissolved before ever touching the ground. The vision itself lasted only a few minutes. The lady, Lúcia reported, reiterated her call for prayer and penance and repeated her promise. "In October, I will perform a miracle so that all may believe." When the apparition ended, the globe of light was seen rising back into the sky, disappearing in the direction it had come. The crowd erupted. For the believers, this was irrefutable proof. They had seen the dimming of the sun. They had seen the globe of light. They had seen the mysterious, disappearing petals. They swarmed the children, trying to touch them, to clip pieces of their clothing as relics. The children had to be rescued by their parents and spirited away through the frenzied mob. But for the opposition, these phenomena were nothing more than mass hysteria, a collective hallucination fueled by religious fervor. The anti-clerical press, which had been mocking the Fatima events for months, went into overdrive. They published scathing articles dismissing the so-called celestial phenomena as tricks of the light, meteorological anomalies, or simply the product of overwrought imaginations. Avelino de Almeida, the influential editor of Portugal's most popular liberal newspaper, O Século, wrote editorials dripping with sarcasm. He portrayed the Fatima pilgrims as ignorant, superstitious peasants being manipulated by a reactionary clergy, desperate to reclaim its power in the new republic. He and his colleagues saw this not as a religious event, but as a dangerous cultural and political regression, a return to the dark ages of blind faith. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, tens of thousands of faithful, their belief now supercharged by the September signs. On the other, the powerful institutions of the state and the press determined to expose this as a fraud. And caught in the middle were three small children. As the days of September bled into October, the pressure cooker reached its boiling point. Lúcia, terrified by the scale of what was to come, began to have doubts. What if the lady didn't come? What if the promised miracle was a figment of her imagination? The shame, the humiliation, the punishment that would befall her and her family would be unbearable. She confessed her fears to Francisco and Jacinta, but the two younger children were unwavering. Their faith was pure, absolute. Jacinta, in her simple, profound way, told Lúcia, "The lady promised. She cannot lie." Bolstered by their certainty, Lúcia resolved to see it through. In the days leading up to October 13th, the weather turned. A cold, relentless rain began to fall across Portugal. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a deluge. It turned the fields into swamps and the roads into rivers of mud. The newspapers in Lisbon and Porto mocked the would-be pilgrims. Who would be foolish enough to travel in such conditions to see a dance from the sun promised by a trio of illiterate shepherd children? It seemed the heavens themselves were siding with the skeptics, conspiring to wash away the entire spectacle. But they came. Despite the storm, they came. From every corner of Portugal and even from across the border in Spain, a tide of humanity began to flow toward the Cova da Iria. They traveled for days on foot, their shoes disintegrating in the muck. They slept in open fields, soaked to the bone, huddled together for warmth against the driving wind and rain. They were farmers, fishermen, shopkeepers, nobles, and beggars. They were the healthy and the sick, the latter carried on stretchers or in the arms of loved ones, hoping for a cure. The press had predicted a few thousand diehards might show up. They were wrong. By the morning of October 13th, under a sky of steel-gray clouds and torrential rain, a crowd estimated between 50 and 70,000 people stood waiting in the giant muddy bowl of the Cova da Iria. They were drenched, shivering, and miserable. But they were there. Among them, standing under a large black umbrella, was Avelino de Almeida, the skeptical editor of O Século, ready to write the definitive, scathing report that would finally put an end to this Fatima nonsense. The entire nation was holding its breath. This was the final act. Either a miracle would happen, validating the faith of tens of thousands and shaking the foundations of the secular republic, or 3 children were about to be exposed as liars in front of the entire world. Noon was approaching. The sky over the Cova da Iria was a leaden, weeping gray. A cold, relentless rain had been falling for hours, turning the hollow into a sea of mud. Tens of thousands of people, some say as many as 70,000, huddled under a forest of black umbrellas. They were a miserable, soaked, and shivering congregation. There were devout believers, their rosary beads slick with rain, their lips moving in silent prayer. But there were also scoffers, journalists with notepads tucked under their coats, university professors, and cynical government officials, all waiting for the great anticlimax. They had come to see the children's secret exposed, to watch this mass delusion dissolve in the October downpour. The official time for the apparition, solar noon, came and went. A ripple of disappointment and mockery spread through the crowd. "It's past the hour," someone shouted. "They're liars. Go home." The faithful looked anxious, their faces etched with doubt. Had they been fools to come? Had they pinned their hopes on the fantasies of 3 peasant children? Lucia's mother, who had come fearing the worst, wept openly, convinced her daughter was about to be lynched by the angry mob. Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, Lucia looked up towards the home oak tree. Her face transformed. She cried out, "Be quiet! Be quiet! The lady is coming!" The jeers died in people's throats. A hush fell over the cova. Lucia, seeing the apparition that was invisible to everyone else, spoke. "What do you want of me?" The lady's reply, heard only by the children, was simple. "I want a chapel to be built here in my honor. I am the Lady of the Rosary. Continue to say the Rosary every day." She promised the war would end soon and the soldiers would return home. Lucia then made a request that must have sounded like madness to the soaking wet crowd. She turned to the people and called out, "She asks you to close your umbrellas." It was a test of faith in its purest form. To close your umbrella in a downpour, based on the word of a child claiming to see an invisible entity. For a moment nobody moved. It was an absurd command. Then, one by one, then in dozens, then in hundreds, the umbrellas began to fold. People willingly accepted the cold rain on their faces, their eyes fixed on the spot where Lucia was gazing. It was an act of collective surrender, a final desperate gesture of belief. And then it happened. The rain stopped. Not gradually, but instantly, as if a faucet had been turned off. The thick gray clouds tore apart, and through the rift the sun appeared. But it was not the sun they knew. It was a spinning opaque silver disk, less brilliant than the moon. As one witness described it, it cast no shadows. You could stare directly at it without the slightest pain or discomfort. A collective gasp rose from 70,000 throats. The world was suddenly bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. The silver disk began to spin on its own axis, like a gigantic wheel of fire. It threw off massive beams of colored light. First, a sheet of brilliant yellow washed over the landscape, painting the trees, the ground, and the faces of the people in a jaundiced hue. Then the light shifted to a deep, spectral violet, as if the entire world were submerged in amethyst. It pulsed through blues and greens and reds, each color changing the very texture of reality for the people below. The crowd was silent, mesmerized, their upturned faces a mosaic of unnatural color. Then the sun stopped spinning. For a terrifying moment, it hung in the sky, and then it began to fall. It detached itself from the heavens, zigzagging and plummeting in a terrifying descent toward the terrified crowd. This was no longer a beautiful spectacle. This was the apocalypse. The end of the world was upon them. Absolute, primal terror gripped the Cova da Iria. People fell to their knees in the mud. Screams of miracle mingled with cries of, "My God, have mercy, and we are all going to die." Men and women, believers and skeptics alike, began to publicly confess their sins, shouting them out for all to hear, believing they were living their final moments on earth. They weren't praying for a sign anymore. They were praying for survival. Avelino de Almeida, the editor-in-chief for Lisbon's largest secular newspaper, O Século, a man who had come to write a satirical piece mocking the entire event, stood frozen in place. He would later write, "The sun, trembling, made incredible and sudden movements outside of all cosmic laws. The sun danced according to the typical expression of the people." Dr. José Maria Garrett, a professor of natural sciences from the University of Coimbra, felt the incredible heat radiating from the falling star. He estimated he was 10 miles away, and he too watched the sun spin and fall, convinced his eyes were deceiving him. Yet everyone around him saw the same thing. For what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, the world held its breath, bracing for impact. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The sun ceased its terrifying plunge, reversed its course, and returned to its normal position in the sky, shining with its familiar blinding brilliance. The people slowly, hesitantly, picked themselves up from the mud. They looked at each other, their faces streaked with tears and rain, a dawning realization in their eyes. They were alive. The world had not ended, but the miracle wasn't finished. A man looked down at his suit, which moments before had been soaked through with rain and caked in mud. It was perfectly clean and bone-dry. A woman touched her hair, her dress dry. A collective murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd as tens of thousands of people realized the same impossible thing. The ground itself, which had been a quagmire of deep, sticky mud, was firm and dry. Their clothes, their bodies, the very earth beneath their feet had been instantly and completely dried. This intimate, physical miracle was, for many, even more convincing than the cosmic dance they had just witnessed. It was personal. It was undeniable. The scoffers were silent. The journalists scribbled furiously, their professional cynicism shattered. Avelino de Almeida, the skeptic, went back to Lisbon and wrote a front-page article not of ridicule, but of awe. His headline read, "How the Sun Danced at Midday in Fátima." The secular, anti-clerical newspaper sold out completely. The government's attempts to suppress the story were futile. 70,000 people had seen the impossible. They left the Cova da Iria not as a mob, but as pilgrims, their lives irrevocably altered. They had come seeking a sign, and they had been given a vision that would shake the foundations of their world. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but the story of the three secrets, and the immense terrifying vision of hell, was only just beginning to unfold. The 70,000 witnesses at Cova da Iria saw a miracle in the sky. They saw the sun dance, plunge, and dry their rain-soaked clothes in an instant. They were terrified, awestruck, and converted, but they did not see what Lúcia, Francisco, and Jacinta saw. While the crowd looked up, the children were shown something else entirely. Something from deep down. They were given the first of three secrets. A vision so profoundly disturbing that it would reorder their young lives, stripping away the last vestiges of childhood innocence and replacing it with an urgent, almost desperate sense of mission. Lúcia dos Santos would later write about it in her memoirs, her words still trembling with the memory decades later. She said the lady, Our Lady of the Rosary, opened her hands once more, just as she had in the previous months. But this time the rays of light didn't just shine upon them. They seemed to penetrate the very earth itself. And suddenly, the ground beneath their feet vanished. The children found themselves looking into a vast, terrifying abyss. Lúcia described it as a great sea of fire. Plunged in this fire were demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, floating about in the conflagration. They were lifted into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves, together with great clouds of smoke, then fell back on every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium. And the sounds were worse than the sight. Amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified them and made them tremble with fear. The demons, Lúcia wrote, could be distinguished by their terrifying and repellent likeness to frightful and unknown animals, all black and transparent. Imagine being 10, 9, and 7 years old. Imagine seeing that. Not in a nightmare you can wake up from, but in broad daylight, a vision bestowed upon you by a celestial being. It lasted only an instant, a single eternal moment. The children were so terrified they instinctively looked up at the lady for help, and Lúcia said they would have died of fright if not for her presence. And as they looked up, their faces pale with terror, the Virgin Mary spoke to them, her expression one of sad, gentle pity. "You have seen hell," she told them, "where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart." This is the key. The vision wasn't just a scare tactic. It wasn't a gratuitous display of horror. It was the why. It was the ultimate motivation for everything that was to come. It was the answer to the question, why pray? Why sacrifice? Why change your life? Because that is the alternative. The vision of hell framed the entire Fatima message. It wasn't about a gentle, abstract request for more prayers. It was a spiritual emergency, a 5-alarm fire for the soul of humanity. The children were shown the stakes, and the stakes were eternal. And it changed them. Instantly. Irrevocably. The carefree shepherds were gone forever. In their place stood 3 solemn figures burdened with a terrible knowledge. Francisco, the quiet, contemplative one, was perhaps the most deeply affected. He hadn't heard the lady's words, only seen her in the visions. When Lúcia and Jacinta told him what she had said, that the vision was hell, he was shaken to his core. He later told them, "I was so sad to see our Lord in such sorrow. We must never commit any sins again." From that day forward, Francisco's entire focus shifted. He would often wander off by himself, not to play, but to find a quiet place to pray. When asked what he was doing, he'd say he was thinking about God, who is so sad because of so many sins, and that he wanted to console our Lord. This wasn't a phase. A 9-year-old boy became a mystic, consumed with the idea of alleviating the sorrow of God himself. And then there was 7-year-old Jacinta. If the vision made Francisco contemplative, it made Jacinta a warrior. She was horrified by the suffering of the souls she had seen. The thought that people, through their own actions, could end up in that sea of fire became an obsession for her. "So many people are falling into hell," she would cry out to her cousins. "So many people." She developed a profound, almost agonizing compassion for sinners. Every prayer, every small act was now an opportunity. She began to take the lady's call for sacrifice to extremes that are, frankly, difficult for us to comprehend today. The children had always been told to make sacrifices, but now they sought them out with a relentless fervor. On hot Portuguese summer days, they would intentionally go without drinking water for the entire day, offering their thirst for the conversion of sinners. Lúcia wrote of their mouths being so parched they could barely speak, yet Jacinta, the youngest, would beam and say, "How good it is to offer this thirst for sinners." They would give their lunches to even poorer children they met on the road. They found a rough, coarse rope, and all 3 tied it tightly around their waists, wearing it day and night under their clothes as a constant, painful penance. It was so agonizing that it sometimes prevented them from sleeping, but they refused to take it off, reminding each other that the Virgin Mary wanted them to make sacrifices. This wasn't the behavior of normal children seeking attention. This was the behavior of witnesses. They were acting like people who had seen the house was on fire and were desperately trying to wake everyone up, even if it meant getting burned themselves. Their parents and the villagers saw them become more pious, more serious, but they couldn't possibly understand the source of this radical transformation. The children were bound by their promise to keep the secrets, and so they carried the weight of this apocalyptic knowledge alone. And that vision of hell, as terrifying as it was only the first piece of the puzzle. It was the foundation. It established the stakes. It explained why the world needed to change course. But it didn't explain what would happen if it didn't. That was the purpose of the second secret. After showing them the consequence of sin, the Virgin Mary laid out a prophecy of the future. A prophecy of what was coming for the world in the 20th century. A future of war, famine, and persecution. She was about to give them a roadmap of the horrors to come. A warning so specific and so chilling that it would predict the greatest conflict in human history, and the rise of an atheistic empire that would spread its errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The vision of hell was about the fate of the individual soul. The second secret was about the fate of nations. And it would all hinge on a specific country, a nation that in 1917 was in the throes of revolution, a nation most of the world was ignoring, but which heaven had just placed at the very center of human destiny: Russia. Russia. To the three shepherd children, this was a word they had likely never even heard. A distant, cold, and incomprehensible land. Yet, in the vision of the second secret, the lady from heaven made it clear that the future of the entire world would pivot on the spiritual destiny of this one nation. She laid out a divine plan. A choice with stakes so high they were almost impossible to grasp. First came the request. She asked for the solemn public consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. This wasn't to be a simple prayer. It had to be a specific, formal act performed by the Pope himself, and at the very same time in union with all the Catholic bishops of the world. It was a request of staggering logistical and ecclesiastical scale, an act of unity, a global chorus of faith, all focused on one single nation. The purpose of this consecration was to place Russia under a special mantle of spiritual protection, to claim it for God before a looming darkness could claim it for itself. Then came the warning, the consequences of inaction. The lady was explicit. If her request was not heeded, Russia would spread its errors throughout the world. These errors, Lúcia would later understand, were the tenets of atheistic communism, a state-enforced ideology that sought to erase God from society, persecute believers, and subjugate the human person to the state. The vision foretold that these errors would cause wars and persecutions of the Church. The good would be martyred, the Pope would have much to suffer, and various nations would be annihilated. This wasn't a vague prediction of tough times ahead. It was a specific diagnosis of a spiritual poison that would emanate from Russia and infect the globe, leading to unimaginable suffering. But then, counterbalancing this terrifying prophecy, came the promise. The lady assured them, "In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world." A promise of ultimate victory, a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. But that peace was conditional. It was entirely dependent on whether humanity, through its leaders in the Church, would listen and obey. The fate of the 20th century, it seemed, was being placed in their hands. Now, consider the sheer improbability of this message in July of 1917. The Bolshevik Revolution, the event that would install atheistic communism in Russia, was still 3 months away. To the wider world, Russia was a chaotic backwater, a crumbling empire imploding in on itself, not a budding superpower poised to export a global ideology. The idea that this specific failing nation would become the primary engine of global conflict and persecution for the next 70 years would have sounded like absolute fantasy. Yet, this is precisely what the children were told. Heaven wasn't pointing to Germany, the antagonist of the Great War currently raging. It wasn't pointing to Britain or France. It was pointing to a nation on the verge of a transformation nobody could yet comprehend. After the visions ended, life moved on. Francisco and Jacinta Marto, as foretold by the lady, were taken to heaven soon after, victims of the Spanish flu pandemic. This left Lúcia dos Santos as the sole, living guardian of the secrets. She carried a burden that no one else on earth could fully understand. Following her calling, she entered the convent of the Dorothean Sisters in Spain, her vow of obedience meaning she could not speak of the secrets unless directly commanded to by her superiors. The prophecies of Fatima, including the urgent requests concerning Russia, were locked away with her, hidden behind cloistered walls. For years, the world remained oblivious. But heaven had not forgotten. On June 13, 1929, while praying in the chapel of her convent in Tye, Spain, Lúcia received another profound vision. In it, she saw the Holy Trinity and the Virgin Mary. And Mary's message was a direct, urgent follow-up to the 1917 request. She told Lúcia, "The moment has come in which God asks the Holy Father, in union with all the bishops of the world, to make the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart, promising to save it by this means. The time for waiting was over. The moment had come. Mary also delivered a new warning, echoing the one Jesus had given to a French saint regarding the consecration of France to his Sacred Heart, a request that was ignored right before the French Revolution. Mary warned that if her request for Russia's consecration was similarly delayed, the consequences would be dire. The message was clear. This was not a casual suggestion. It was a divine command with a deadline. Now began one of the most frustrating chapters in the Fatima saga. How does a humble, cloistered nun get a message of this magnitude to the Pope in Rome? Lúcia did exactly as she was supposed to. She wrote down everything and gave it to her confessor. Her confessor, in turn, passed it up the chain of command. But the Vatican is an ancient institution, one that moves with immense caution and deliberation. It is not easily swayed by private revelations, even those from a visionary whose initial prophecies were already being validated by the Church. Pope Pius XI was made aware of the request, but the 1930s were a time of immense turmoil. The rise of Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy, and the Spanish Civil War consumed the attention of the world. And the logistics of coordinating a simultaneous act by every single bishop on the planet were mind-boggling. The request was studied, considered, and ultimately not acted upon as specified. As the years ticked by, the warnings of Fatima began to unfold with chilling accuracy. Russia, now the Soviet Union, consolidated its power. Its errors, communism and militant atheism, began their insidious spread, first through political subversion and then, after World War II, through brute force. The Iron Curtain descended across Europe. Nations were, quite literally, annihilated, absorbed into the Soviet bloc. The Church was brutally persecuted. Priests were imprisoned, believers were executed, and cathedrals were turned into museums of atheism. The world was plunged into the Cold War, a global standoff between two ideologies, with the constant threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over humanity. The wars, the famines, the persecutions, it was all happening, just as the vision had foretold. Pope Pius XII, who was known as the Pope of Fatima, had a deep devotion to the message. In 1942, in the darkest days of World War II, he consecrated the entire world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It was a powerful act, but it did not fulfill the specific conditions. It was the world, not specifically Russia, and it was done by him alone, not in union with all the world's bishops. Later, in 1952, he did specifically consecrate the peoples of Russia, but again it was done by him alone. Sister Lúcia confirmed that while these acts brought graces to the world, they were not the act that heaven had requested. The specific formula had not been followed. It was a geopolitical chess match being played with human souls, and it seemed heaven's move was being perpetually delayed. The promise of peace remained just out of reach, contingent on an act of obedience that for decades seemed too difficult, too politically complicated, or perhaps too strange for the leaders of the Church to fully enact. But as the Cold War deepened and the world learned to live with the daily fear of Armageddon, a young man was growing up behind the Iron Curtain, in Poland. A man who experienced the errors of Russia, not as a theological concept, but as the crushing reality of his daily life. He saw the persecution firsthand. He understood the soullessness of the communist ideology because he lived and breathed in its shadow. He had been an actor, a quarry worker, a poet, and a secret seminarian. His name was Karol Wojtyla, and his destiny, forged in the crucible of suffering predicted at Fatima, would become inextricably linked with this unfulfilled prophecy. He had no idea that he was being prepared to be the Pope who would finally have to confront the vision that had shaken the world, and that his own life would become a central part of its dramatic and violent final chapter. On October 16, 1978, the white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel, but the man who emerged onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica was not who anyone expected. He was not Italian, the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. He was a Pole, a man forged in the crucible of Nazi occupation and communist oppression. He was Karol Wojtyla, and he took the name Pope John Paul II, the boy who had lost his mother, his brother, and his father, the young man who had dodged Gestapo patrols to study for the priesthood in secret, the bishop who had cleverly outmaneuvered communist authorities for decades, was now the leader of over 1 billion Catholics. He was a spiritual warrior from behind the Iron Curtain, and he possessed a deep, unshakable devotion to the Virgin Mary, a devotion encapsulated in his papal motto, Totus Tuus, totally yours. From the very beginning, his papacy was a whirlwind. He was charismatic, athletic, and utterly fearless. He traveled the world, drawing crowds that numbered in the millions, speaking in dozens of languages. He was a global superstar, a moral force that governments could not ignore. And in June of 1979, he did the unthinkable. He returned to his native Poland. For 9 days, he traveled the country, and at every stop, millions of Poles poured into the streets, not to greet a political leader, but to welcome a spiritual father who represented everything the communist regime had tried to extinguish: faith, hope, and Polish identity. In Warsaw's Victory Square, before a sea of humanity, he uttered a prayer that became a prophecy. "Let your spirit descend," he cried out, "and renew the face of the earth." Then he added, "the face of this land." The crowd erupted. It was a direct challenge to the atheistic Soviet Empire. The seeds of the Solidarity movement were sown, and the first crack appeared in the Berlin Wall. The Kremlin watched with fury and alarm. This pope was a problem, a very serious problem. 2 years later, the world's attention was fixed on St. Peter's Square. It was Wednesday, May 13, 1981. The Pope was making his weekly rounds in the open-air Popemobile, greeting the faithful, smiling, blessing children. The sun was shining. The atmosphere was joyful. The date, May 13th, was a familiar one to the Pope. It was the feast day of Our Lady of Fátima, the 64th anniversary of the very first apparition. As the vehicle moved slowly through the cheering crowd, a man in the square raised a 9mm Browning semi-automatic pistol. His name was Mehmet Ali Akka, a professional assassin, an escaped convict from Turkey. He took aim and fired. The first shot struck the Pope in the abdomen, tearing through his intestines. A second bullet hit his right elbow and left index finger. Chaos erupted. Pigeons scattered into the sky. The cheers turned to screams of panic and horror. The Pope slumped into the arms of his aides, his white cassock turning crimson. As he was rushed from the square, bleeding profusely, he was heard whispering, "Madonna, Madonna." He was losing consciousness. At Rome's Gemelli Hospital, doctors worked frantically to save him. He had lost nearly 3/4 of his blood. His blood pressure was plummeting. For hours, his life hung by a thread. The world held its breath and prayed. He survived. Doctors would later call his recovery medically inexplicable. The bullet had miraculously missed his vital organs and major arteries by millimeters. Had it deviated even slightly, he would have been dead before he reached the hospital. But for John Paul II, there was no question of luck or coincidence. As he recovered, the significance of the date, May 13th, weighed heavily on his mind. He began to believe his life had been spared for a reason. He felt a supernatural hand had intervened, and so he made a request. He asked for the envelope, the one that had been sealed since 1960, the one containing the third secret of Fatima. In his hospital room, the Pope read the words of Sister Lúcia. He read about the vision of a bishop dressed in white. He read about this bishop walking through a half-ruined city, past the corpses of the dead, climbing a steep mountain toward a large wooden cross. He read about the soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at this bishop, and how he fell to the ground seemingly dead. And as he read, a profound recognition dawned. He saw himself. He was the bishop dressed in white. The vision he was reading was not some distant apocalyptic future. It was the story of what had just happened to him in St. Peter's Square. The prophecy, written down decades before he was even a priest, had foretold his own martyrdom, a martyrdom that, by some miracle, he had survived. He would later say, "It was a mother's hand that guided the bullet's path, and in his throes the Pope halted at the threshold of death." One hand, Akka's, had fired the bullet, but another hand, the hand of Our Lady of Fátima, had deflected it, turning a fatal shot into a survivable wound. The connection was undeniable, the message crystal clear. His life had been spared, but the mission of the Fatima prophecies was now his personal responsibility. Heaven had given him a second chance, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The Virgin Mary's request, the one that had been ignored and deferred for decades, was now the most urgent priority in the entire Catholic Church: the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. This was the key. the solution offered from heaven to prevent the spread of Russia's errors and to bring about an era of peace. Previous popes had attempted consecrations, but they had always been incomplete. Pope Pius XII had consecrated the world, but not Russia specifically. Pope Paul VI had renewed the consecration, but not in union with all the bishops of the world, as the vision had demanded. The conditions had never been fully met. John Paul II would not make the same mistake. He understood the stakes. He had lived his entire life fighting the errors of Russia on the front lines in Poland. He had now experienced firsthand the violence and suffering described in the Third Secret. For him, this was not a matter of theological debate. It was a matter of life and death for himself and for the world. In 1982, 1 year to the day after the assassination attempt, he traveled to Fatima to give thanks for his life. He had the very bullet that was removed from his body placed in the crown of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima, where it remains to this day, a permanent symbol of the prophecy and his miraculous survival. Then he set the wheels in motion. He wrote to every Catholic bishop on the planet, summoning them to join him spiritually in a solemn act. On March 25, 1984, in St. Peter's Square, before the very statue of Our Lady of Fatima that had been brought from Portugal for the occasion, Pope John Paul II, in union with the bishops of the world, formally consecrated the world, and specifically Russia, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. He prayed, "Accept, O Mother of Christ, this cry laden with the sufferings of all individual human beings, laden with the sufferings of whole societies. Let there be revealed once more, in the history of the world, the infinite saving power of the redemption, the power of merciful love. May it put a stop to evil. May it transform consciences. May your Immaculate Heart reveal for all the light of hope." The act was done. The command from the 1917 apparitions had, in the Pope's mind, finally been fulfilled. The Vatican had played its hand. The Pope who had survived the assassin's bullet now waited for heaven's response. He had performed the consecration that was supposed to stop the spread of Russia's errors and usher in an era of peace. Yet, in 1984, the Soviet Union was as powerful as ever. The Cold War raged on. Nuclear annihilation remained a terrifying possibility. The world watched and waited. Had it worked? Was the consecration accepted? And what did the last surviving witness, Sister Lúcia, still living in her cloistered convent, have to say about it all? Her answer would ignite a new firestorm of controversy that continues to burn to this very day. The world watched and waited. The act was done. On March 25, 1984, Pope John Paul II had stood before the original statue of Our Lady of Fatima, brought from Portugal to St. Peter's Square, and in union with bishops across the globe, consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But the question echoed in chancelleries and chapels from Moscow to Washington. Was it enough? He hadn't explicitly said the word Russia. He had consecrated the world, and specifically those peoples and nations who had a special need for it. To the critics, this was a fatal flaw, a diplomatic sidestep that nullified the entire act. They claimed heaven's request was specific for a reason, and that this generalized formula was a failure of courage. The Vatican remained silent. The Pope had done what he felt was right. The only person on earth who could truly validate the act was the last surviving seer, Sister Lúcia dos Santos, now an elderly Carmelite nun living a life of silence and prayer in her convent in Coimbra, Portugal. The pressure on her was immense. Letters poured into the Vatican, begging for clarification. For months there was nothing. Then, slowly, trickles of information began to emerge. In a private letter dated November 1989, Lúcia wrote to a confidant, confirming it. "Yes," she stated, "it has been done. And since then I have said that it has been done." She would later repeat this confirmation to cardinals and investigators sent by the Vatican. She explained that because the Pope's consecration was universal and made in union with all the bishops, Russia was implicitly included. According to the last visionary, God had accepted it. But for a fervent and growing movement of traditionalist Catholics, soon to be known as Fatimites, this was not good enough. They claimed Lúcia was under duress, a prisoner in her own convent, forced by the Vatican to say what they wanted to hear. They pointed to her earlier statements where she insisted Russia must be specifically named. To them, the 1984 consecration was a sham, and the real one had yet to be performed. The great promise of Fatima, the conversion of Russia and an era of peace, was still being held hostage by a disobedient church hierarchy. And then the impossible happened. As Lúcia was writing her letters of confirmation in late 1989, the world was changing at a speed no one could have predicted. On November 9th, the Berlin Wall, that great concrete scar that symbolized the Iron Curtain in the Cold War, was breached. Not by tanks or bombs, but by ordinary people with hammers and bare hands, laughing and crying as they tore down the symbol of their oppression. The Soviet Union, the atheistic empire that had spread its errors throughout the world, began to crumble from within. One by one, its satellite states in Eastern Europe declared independence. There were no nuclear bombs, no World War III. The great superpower, armed with enough firepower to destroy the planet a dozen times over, just dissolved. By 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. Russia, for the first time in generations, was free from communist rule. Churches that had been used as warehouses and museums were reopened. The very errors Fatima had warned against seemed to be in full retreat. For Pope John Paul II and the Vatican, this was the sign. This was the miracle. The consecration had been accepted. The peaceful, almost unbelievable collapse of the Soviet Empire was the direct result of the act performed in 1984. The promise had been kept. The world had been pulled back from the brink. The Pope, who had grown up under the shadow of both Nazism and communism, saw it as a profound vindication of his faith and his devotion to Mary. With the Cold War over, only one piece of the puzzle remained. The most tantalizing, most terrifying piece of all, the third secret. For decades, it had been the ultimate Catholic mystery, locked away in the Vatican archives. What could it possibly contain that was so frightening? Pope John XXIII trembled and refused to reveal it in 1960. As the new millennium dawned, Pope John Paul II, now aged and frail but spiritually triumphant, believed the time had finally come. On May 13, 2000, the 83rd anniversary of the first apparition, he traveled to Fatima to beatify Jacinta and Francisco Marto. And there, before a crowd of hundreds of thousands, the Vatican Secretary of State announced that the third secret would at long last be made public. The world held its breath. When the text was finally released a month later, it was not a prediction of a specific apocalypse or the end of the world. It was a vision, a deeply symbolic and violent vision. Lúcia described seeing an angel with a flaming sword, about to strike the earth, but the splendor of the Virgin Mary holds him back. Then she saw a bishop dressed in white. She wrote, "We had the impression that it was the Holy Father. He was walking through a great city half in ruins, filled with corpses. He prayed for the souls of the dead as he made his way, afflicted with pain and sorrow, toward a large cross on top of a mountain. And when he reached it, he knelt at its foot and was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way, bishops, priests, and religious and lay people were killed one after another." Alongside the text, the Vatican provided its official interpretation. This was not about the future, they explained, but about the past. The vision was a symbolic representation of the 20th century's great persecution of the Church at the hands of atheistic regimes like communism and Nazism. The bishop dressed in white was a succession of popes. And the climax of the vision, the Pope being shot down at the foot of the cross, was the assassination attempt on John Paul II himself on May 13, 1981, the anniversary of Fatima. He believed he was the Pope in the vision. He was shot, but he did not die. He famously said, "One hand fired the bullet and another guided it," attributing his survival directly to the intervention of Our Lady of Fatima. The third secret, according to the Vatican, was now a closed chapter of history. But if the Vatican thought this would end the speculation, they were catastrophically wrong. The release of the secret ignited the single greatest controversy in the entire Fatima saga. The Fatimites and other critics immediately cried foul. They claimed the document released was not the real third secret, or at best only a part of it. Their evidence? First, they pointed to interviews with Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, who had read the secret and was in charge of its release. Before the release, he had hinted it concerned dangers to the faith and the life of the Christian. This seemed to be missing from the vision of the martyred Pope. Second, they pointed to the words of Lúcia herself. In her memoirs, she wrote the secret on a single sheet of paper. The document released by the Vatican was 4 pages long. Critics seized on this discrepancy, but the most explosive claim came from a supposed leaked testimony of Father Malachi Martin, a former Jesuit and Vatican insider, who claimed to have read the real secret in 1960. Martin alleged that the true secret was far more terrifying than a vision of persecution from outside the church. He claimed it spoke of a great apostasy within the church, a loss of faith that would begin at the very top, with popes and cardinals. A spiritual crisis, a corruption of doctrine, a church at war with itself. This, they argued, was the real reason it was kept hidden for so long. Not to avoid panic about communism, but to avoid revealing a crisis of faith inside the Vatican itself. And so, the story of Fatima ends not with a neat conclusion, but with a schism of belief. On one side, you have the official position of the Catholic Church. The consecration was done, Russia converted, the third secret has been revealed, and its prophecies have been fulfilled in the trials of the 20th century. On the other side, you have a passionate group of believers who insist the consecration was invalid, the true secret remains hidden, and the prophecy of a great apostasy is unfolding before our very eyes. Sister Lúcia, the last link to that sunny day in 1917, passed away in 2005 at the age of 97. She maintained to the end that the consecration was accepted, and that the Church had spoken truthfully. Yet the questions remain, debated endlessly in books, documentaries, and online forums. What really happened in that field a century ago? Were 3 children given a divine roadmap for the most violent century in human history? A warning of a godless empire? A vision of an assassinated pope? And a promise of eventual triumph? Or is it a story that has been shaped and reshaped by the hopes and fears of the faithful? A powerful legend that gives meaning to chaotic world events? The Fatima prophecies are more than just a historical curiosity. They represent a fundamental human struggle, the search for meaning and suffering, for divine intervention in a world that often feels random and cruel. Whether you see it as a fulfilled prophecy, an ongoing warning, or a complex psychological phenomenon, one thing is undeniable. The vision of 3 shepherd children in a remote Portuguese village truly did shake the world, and its echoes continue to challenge and inspire us, leaving us to wonder about the thin veil that separates our world from the mysteries that lie beyond.